This is the story of Mary Alice Greenhalgh, born November 25th, 1880, in Adlington, Lancashire, England. Adlington is a small parish in the borough of Chorley, about 19 miles northwest of Manchester, near the West Pennine Moors. It became a separate parish in 1842 and expanded into a township during the coal and cotton industry boom of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. She was the 8th child born to Felix Greenhalgh, a retired collier, and Elizabeth Greenhalgh, affectionately known as Betty. Mary Alice has 6 siblings living at home at the time of her birth: James, 18, Ellen, 16, John, 13, Robert, 7, Elizabeth Ann, 6, and Felix, 2. She was baptized at Christ Church, Adlington, in March of 1881. As shown in the occupation column, the town is centered around coal mining. Shortly after the baptism, a census is taken and shows the family living at 111 Railway Road. Felix is mistakenly recorded as Peter, as well as his son Felix Jr. It's common to find errors on censuses, as they were usually taken at the door, and since Felix and Betty did not read or write, a mistake wouldn't be noticed by them. It is also recorded that Felix is unable to work due to a disability. He's been blind for 10 years due to an accident in a coal mine. As the youngest child, Mary Alice is listed last, at 4 months old. 111 Railway Road is a small cottage near the top of the hill in Adlington. Photos of individual houses from this time are rare. These 2 photos show the immediate area. Number 111 is tucked back in here. Google Maps shows the cottage is still intact and inhabited. Much of the view hasn't changed in 100 years. Adlington was ideally located for both the coal and cotton industries. The canal was purposefully built to connect the cities of Leeds and Liverpool, and the canal traverses through Adlington and its proximity to the Wigan coal field. Barges such as this were used to transport goods to the port of Liverpool and then on to other ports of the world. 2 railway lines also existed in Adlington at this time: the Lancashire Union Railway, stopping at the White Bear Station, and the Northern Railway line from Bolton to Preston, stopping at Adlington Station. The White Bear line no longer exists in 2025. In the 1891 census, Mary Alice and her family have moved to 3 Ghent Row, just off Railway Road at the lower end near the marketplace. As these dwellings no longer exist, it's difficult to determine if number 3 is this one or this one. The dwelling was 1 room, no plumbing, simply a space to rest and call their own. Mary Alice's late father was listed on the electoral register of 1894 at this address, indicating it is owned and not rented, a possible reason for the move. There are 2 new members to the household: Mary Alice's younger sister Martha, as well as her niece, Elizabeth, born to her older sister Ellen out of wedlock, who has not yet entered school. Both Mary Alice and Martha attend Adlington National School, pictured here. Life for the Greenhalgh family was similar to most in the area. Her brothers worked for the local colliery mining coal, her older sisters in the cotton mills. This was grueling, difficult work, 6 days a week, often more than 12 hours a day. The 8-hour day we are accustomed to now wasn't initiated until after 1906. On March 10th, 1898, Mary Alice's father Felix passes at the age of 59. He is interred by the vicar T.H. Minette in the cemetery surrounding Christ Church in Adlington. Just over 2 years later, Mary Alice's mother passes at the same age and is buried with her husband. In April of 1901, another census is taken and shows that the siblings are still together, living at the same address. Although Ellen is the oldest sibling, the head of the household is listed as her younger brother Robert, the oldest male in the house. Every member of the household is working. Mary Alice is a cotton weaver at the local mill. On the 17th of May, 1902, Mary Alice Greenhalgh married Robert Almond, a 21-year-old coal miner who lives on the next street. Oddly, she has listed her father's occupation as brewer, even though no other records show this detail. I've often wondered how a blind man would support a large family and continue to have children without a source of income. Marriage records at this time are also a great source for the signatures of previous generations. Although they look alike, there are clear differences in the penmanship. This aerial photo of the junction of Railway Road and Church Street is more contemporary, but is one of the few that show Ghent Row and Anderton Street, as they have since been demolished. Mary Alice and Robert moved to number 8 Anderson Street, just next door to his parents, Robert Allman Sr. and his wife Nancy, at number 10. Life for Mary Alice in Adlington at the turn of the 20th century would look something like these women shown at the Duxbury Mill. This was a water-powered mill which was run by John Brown but owned by Sir Thomas Standish and supplied flour to the area. Meat was available from the local butcher who delivered using his wagon, shown here in 1900. Coal was similarly delivered to locals by horse-drawn wagon. Here is the marketplace in Adlington as shown in 1900. The fountain was added in 1887 to celebrate Queen Victoria's Jubilee. Mary Alice's new husband, Robert, is working at Duxbury Colliery as a coal hewer, a miner who cuts coal from the coalface using hand tools. This was dangerous and unhealthy work. No helmets used. Most men wore flat caps, as shown. The Davy safety lamp shown on the belt of this miner is an attempt to help prevent explosions due to an open flame. As a married woman, Mary Alice is no longer working and takes care of the home. Less than a year after their marriage, Mary Alice's mother-in-law Nancy dies of a gastric ulcer hemorrhage. She was only 46 years old, and her son Robert was present at the time. Although with it being next door, I imagine Mary Alice and other family members were present as well. In July of 1904, Mary Alice and Robert have their first child, Richard Almond, named for his paternal great-grandfather. Mary Alice falls pregnant again almost immediately. Here is the marketplace in 1904. Mary Alice, Robert, and baby Richard are living just behind in this area. On September 24th, 1904, Mary Alice's father-in-law, Robert Sr., remarries to Annie Anderton, a pit-brow lass and spinster who lives at number 5, which would be the opposite side of the street. Robert Sr. asked Thomas Allerton to be best man, his son-in-law, husband of his daughter Elizabeth Ann. A few short months later, in December of 1904, baby Richard Almond dies at age 6 months, cause unknown. In March of 1905, Mary Alice gives birth to her second child, a boy they decide to call Felix, after her father. 1 year later, another child is born, a boy they call William Robert, the first child to have a middle name. Sadly, William Robert passes on the 7th of August, 1906, at the age of 5 months. Bronchopneumonia convulsions is listed as the cause of death. You can see Mary Alice has reported the death with a shaky signature. Shortly after this, Mary Alice, Robert, and young Felix moved to number 1 Crook Street on the west side of the Leeds and Liverpool Canal. It is a traditional 2-up, 2-down cottage ubiquitous to this area. Lives at this time centered around the church, and walking days were common. Here is a walking procession through the marketplace in 1906. On October 19, 1907, Mary Alice gives birth to her 4th child, another boy they call Richard Henry. Less than a month later, on the 14th of November 1907, Mary Alice's older sister Ellen marries for the first time, at 42, to Bill Hackett, a gardener from Blackrod who has also never been married. The marriage certificate shows Bill's moved into the home of Ellen, who lived at number 5 Crook Street with her daughter Elizabeth. 2 weeks later, on November 28, 1907, Mary Alice and Robert's eldest child, Felix, dies of acute meningitis and encephalitis. The death certificate indicates he was ill for 3 days and died at home in the presence of his father. 2 years later, on December 29, 1909, Mary Alice gives birth to her 5th child, her first girl, they name Isabella. The birth is not registered until a month later by Robert. The electoral register of 1910 shows Mary Alice and Robert are still living at number 1 Crook Street. It would seem the house is owned by Robert, as it is listed as a qualifying property. Also, some numbers on the street are missing, possibly being rented. The register also shows that the Greenhalgh family has remained close. Mary Alice is at number 1, her sister Ellen at number 5 with her husband, and their brother Felix at number 7. The 1911 census was taken on April 2nd, and for the first time, individuals filled out the forms themselves. Additional information is also included on this census, showing the number of births to the marriage and whether they are still living. Child and infant mortality was far too common at the time, sadly. Robert has also indicated the house has 5 rooms, and they have 2 boarders, Robert's younger brother Richard, who is unmarried, and Thomas Rigby, a co-worker of Richard's. If you look closely, you can see Robert has indicated the names of their employers. He is working at Duxbury Colliery, and his brother at Ellerbeck Colliery, also a local. This photo was taken in 1910, but no names are given. I have to wonder if this could be Robert. Perhaps not, but given that Mary Alice and Robert could not afford luxuries like photographs, it's nice to consider that they may exist somewhere, even if they are unnamed. Mary Alice gives birth to her 6th child, another boy they name Henry, on February 12, 1912. The following year, they have another boy they call James. Life continues on much the same. Here's another church procession through town in 1913, looking very similar to the one shown previously. On July 28, 1914, England declares war, and despite the country not having an army at the time, Lord Kitchener made an appeal for volunteers. Here, a large group of men from Adlington wait at the station to take the King's shilling. Conscription wouldn't start until 1916, and was only directed at single men and childless widowers, which explains why Robert did not participate. Although the war was distant, it still had an effect on the population of Adlington. In January 1915, funds totaling £188, 16 shillings and 2 pence were collected by the employees at the Ellerbeck Colliery to assist families of soldiers at the front. Eggs were regularly collected and donated for wounded soldiers and sailors in hospital, and the Adlington district also responded generously to the 100,000 Belgian refugees. At the beginning of September, Mary Alice gives birth to child number 8, a boy they name William. Mary Alice and Robert decide to move again and cross back to the east side of the canal to Church Street, just a few hundred meters from their old residence on Anderton Street. Church Street was one of the main roads, and you can see the stack of Adlington Cotton Mill in the background. The church is on the left, and Mary Alice and Robert have moved to number 41, as shown here. Although the footprint seems large, 41 Church Street is a tiny cottage, just a small square at the back. This video shot in 2024 shows it is still inhabited. On November 4th, 1918, Mary Alice gives birth to twins, a boy they call Robert and a girl they call Mary Alice. The Spanish flu pandemic, which first hit Lancashire in June of 1918, was now in its 2nd wave. A newspaper from the week of November 8th shows little to no mention of the outbreak other than a small article suggesting the need for a Ministry of Health. Most newspapers at the time printed small for cost savings and tried to include an enormous amount of information. It's still disappointing to see the amount of space allocated. Mary Alice was very vulnerable, having just given birth, and came down with the flu immediately. She developed pneumonia the next day, as indicated on the death certificate. The term parturition refers to the act of giving birth, and you can see there's no number 3 noted, indicating it wasn't a cause of death, but a factor. She dies on November 10th, 1918, almost a week after becoming ill. Her husband Robert reported it the next day, indicating he was present, but they had 7 living children at this time. It's unclear if they were present at the time of their mother's death. Mary Alice passed during the peak of the pandemic, likely for a combination of reasons. Brandy and whiskey were the popular remedies, and the ill were fed milk and beef tea. Medicines advertised to help were often costly and out of reach for Robert to provide. Also, the public were not informed on the situation, as it was felt that worrying about the disease would increase one's susceptibility to illness and even weaken the nation's resolve in the war effort. This is where the term "keep calm and carry on" stems from. The existence of only one photo of Mary Alice and no other family members would suggest it was something of a luxury they could not afford. It's only a portrait, and the shirt seems to have been added artificially. The discovery of a second copy lends credence to the idea that a small collection was taken to provide each of the children with a memento of their mother. The first copy found was kept in a book by her son Harry, who was 6.5 at the time of her death. It's in much better condition than the copy held by Isabella, which has been cut smaller and has "My Mother" written across the bottom. The day after Mary Alice dies, the armistice is signed and World War I comes to an end. Most employers give their staff a holiday for Monday, the 11th, and Tuesday, the 12th. Some industries went further and employees were given time off until Thursday, the 14th of November. Imagine the juxtaposition between the grief felt in the home of Mary Alice and the celebrations happening at the same time. Robert has been left a widower with 7 children, ranging from 12 to 6 days old. Infant food and formula were first made available in the 1880s, but most were fattening and lacked nutrients. Milk in Britain between 1880 and 1940 was also often contaminated, causing tuberculosis and diarrhea. Poor mothers like Mary Alice breastfed because it was cheapest and sometimes reduced the chances of becoming pregnant. Additionally, poor mothers were often malnourished and made poorer quality milk, which dried up sooner. Now that Mary Alice has passed, alternatives must be found in an attempt to feed the twins. These included evaporated milk, cow's milk diluted with water, barley or oatmeal water, or pops, small chunks of bread soaked in milk. Sadly, baby Robert passed on November 22nd at 17 days old. The cause of death is gastritis, which is an inflammation of the stomach lining causing vomiting and nausea. It's sometimes as a result of an allergic reaction, but obviously in reaction to something he was being fed. He was in the care of Mary E. Nightingale at the time of his death, who lived across the road at number 26. I believe she was the doctor's wife. After this, a decision is made to put baby Mary Alice in the care of Robert's younger brother, Arnold, and his wife Emily, who live in Chorley, 3 miles north. At the time, Emily was pregnant, and perhaps it was thought she might serve as a wet nurse. Sadly, baby Mary Alice passed on January 6, 1919, at the age of 2 months, in the care of her Aunt Emily. The cause of death is listed as marasmus, which is a severe caloric deficiency and undernourishment. It comes from the Greek marasmos, meaning withering. Mary Alice is buried at Adlington Cemetery, a beautiful space still used to this day. Due to the family's economic crisis, there are no markers placed. It is simply known by family that they are along the north wall, shown here. Mary Alice died 2 weeks before her 38th birthday, preceded by her children Richard, William Robert, and Felix, and she was joined shortly after by her youngest, Robert and Mary Alice. Thank you for watching this video. If you're interested in ancestry or genealogy, please follow along for more simple but fascinating stories of my family members.